This story begins in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, which is the largest desert in East Asia. A company had arrived there, intending to drill for oil, but their information was incorrect. There was no oil. Now, all the employees were preparing to leave. A plane was sent to pick them up, piloted by a man named Frank, along with his co-pilot. They were meant to fly all the equipment and employees back to Beijing. Everyone boarded the plane, and they took off for Beijing. Suddenly, a massive sandstorm began in the desert. Frank's co-pilot asked what they should do. Frank explained that if they turned back, they would have to wait for more fuel, and he wasn't sure how long that would take. He decided they had to press on. He flew the plane higher to try and get above the sandstorm, but the plane was overloaded and they were trapped in the storm. They tried to contact someone via radio, but the connection was lost. The sand caused one of their engines to fail. Frank realized he had to make an emergency landing and began descending. The landing was extremely difficult because he couldn't see anything ahead. As the plane got lower, its tail struck a rock, causing the back door to open. One passenger was thrown out and died. The plane then skidded along the desert floor. When it finally came to a stop, they found that 2 more passengers had died. They couldn't go outside yet because the storm was still raging. When the storm subsided, they saw that the entire plane was buried in sand. A few hours later, the sand blew away on its own, and the plane became visible again. Everyone got out and checked their food and water supplies. They discovered they had enough to last for about a month. One man, however, said he wanted to walk out of the desert on his own. To get out, they would need to travel 200 miles, as they were now somewhere in China, not Mongolia, but they didn't know their exact location. Their radio was also not working. The man who wanted to leave said he had done marathons, hiking, and trekking, and believed he could make it. He was told that it was the month of July, the hottest time in the desert. For every glass of water he drank, he would lose the equivalent of 10 glasses of water in sweat within minutes. He said he would travel only at night. He was warned that he wouldn't be able to find his way because the surrounding hills were magnetic, which would make his compass useless, causing him to walk in circles. He then understood he couldn't leave alone at that time. That same night, while everyone was sleeping inside the plane, a storm was brewing outside. A man named Davis went out to use the toilet. On his way back, his foot hit a rock, and he tumbled down a sand dune. In the storm, he couldn't see anything and got lost. He shouted for help, but no one heard him. In the morning, they discovered Davis was missing. They searched for him everywhere, but couldn't find him, as he was buried in the sand. Everyone was distraught. A woman went to Frank and asked what the chances were of someone coming to rescue them. Frank said there was only a 5% chance. He explained they couldn't walk out because they were in the middle of the desert and they had very little food and water. If they started walking, their supplies would run out in 2 days and no one would survive. He said that even though the chances of rescue were slim, he was an optimist and preferred to wait. Outside, the other people's hopes of being rescued began to fade. 2 people decided to leave and started taking some water with them. Frank said no one would be taking water, and an argument over it turned into a scuffle, causing the water to spill. At that point, a man named Elliot came forward. He said he had an idea that could save them all. He had been observing the plane for days and believed they could rebuild it into a smaller, functioning one. Frank asked him what he knew about planes. Elliot revealed that he used to design them. No one knew much about Elliot because he hadn't worked for the company that was drilling for oil. He had been with them for the past 2 years, ever since he had a chance encounter with them in Eros. Everyone was shocked to learn about Elliot's background, but they also felt a glimmer of hope and agreed to rebuild the plane. Frank, however, didn't agree. He said it was impossible and flatly refused. The next morning, one of the men, James, left. The woman went to look for him, but Frank stopped her, saying he would go instead. Frank went to the hill where the plane's tail had struck and found the body of the man who had fallen out. His clothes were missing, and there were bullet casings on the ground. Frank was stunned. Just then, James appeared. James said that someone had been there before them. He had gone there to get his watch, which he had lost to the man in a poker game, but the watch was no longer on his wrist. They realized that desert smugglers had been there and had taken a watch. The bullet casings meant the smugglers had used the body for target practice. Frank told James to come back, but James refused. He asked Frank why he didn't want to rebuild the plane. Frank explained that he didn't want to give them false hope, as he was sure it wouldn't work. James replied that every person in the world wants love, and if you can't give them love, you should give them hope. And if you can't even give them hope, you should let them do what they want to do. After hearing James's words, Frank agreed to help the others build the plane, despite his conviction that it was impossible. The two returned to their companions, and everyone began working on the plane. They worked at night because of the extreme daytime heat. Their problems escalated one night when sparks from their welding fell on the fuel they had saved for a fire in the generator. A huge explosion occurred. No one was hurt, but all their fuel was destroyed. They now only had the fuel that was in the plane's tank, which was necessary for them to fly out. They couldn't use it for anything else, so they were forced to work during the day in the scorching heat. They didn't give up and began working in the daytime. After rebuilding the plane, they had to attach a wing. They had only one chance. If the wing fell, they wouldn't be able to lift it again because they didn't have a crane. They slowly began to lower the wing, but the chain holding it broke. The wing slid down and crashed directly into the plane. Everyone was in shock. A man who was already inside the plane, ready to attach the wing with a bolt, came out and said, "I did it." The wing, when it slid down, had landed in the exact position it needed to be. With the wing now attached, the entire structure of the plane was complete. Everyone was filled with hope that they would fly away, and they started dancing and celebrating. They also began clearing sand to create a runway for takeoff. But it wasn't going to be that easy. One day, an electrical storm began with frequent lightning strikes. The plane's wing had fuel inside, so everyone ran away to a safe distance. Elliot, however, didn't leave. He didn't want to lose the plane at any cost. Just as lightning was about to strike him, Frank grabbed him and jumped away, saving his life. If anything had happened to Elliot, no one else could have completed the plane. They named the plane Pheonix, after the powerful, mythological bird of the desert that rises from its own ashes. They still had a lot of work to do on the Pheonix. As their water supply dwindled, they spotted some people with tents in the distance one night. They were smugglers who transported weapons across the desert. Frank suggested they ask them for water, but Elliot was against it. Frank and some of his companions went to the smugglers' camp. Frank and his partner hid behind a rock, ready to attack if there was any danger, as they had a gun. When they asked the smugglers for water, one of them shot at Frank's group. Frank and his companion fired back, killing the smugglers. One smuggler managed to escape. Though Frank had a chance to shoot him, he didn't, as he wasn't a killer. James found his lost watch on one of the dead smugglers. Realizing these were the same men who had been there before and had shot their dead companion's body for target practice. They brought the one injured smuggler back to their plane. Some people wanted to kill him for what he had done, but Frank refused. During the argument, Elliot shot the smuggler dead. This caused a huge argument between Frank and Elliot blamed Frank, saying they were stuck there because he was the pilot, and their companion had died because of him, since he had gone to the smugglers' camp despite Elliot's warning. Frank got angry and punched Elliot. Elliot's ego was hurt, and he declared that he wouldn't work on the plane anymore. He said he had done enough work, the equivalent of 10 people, while everyone else rested. Kelly, the woman, went to him and told him they needed him and couldn't build the plane without him. Elliot said he would only continue if everyone requested him to, and so everyone, even Frank, had to. Frank said, "You are the boss here. Please finish this job." Elliot agreed, and they all resumed working on the plane. One day, they saw the smuggler who had escaped returning with his companions. The smugglers, knowing that Frank's group was armed, didn't approach them. They were aware that the group's food and water would soon run out, making them weak, and that's when they planned to attack. Meanwhile, Frank's group worked even harder and finally finished the plane. Frank found a magazine with pictures of different plane models. He realized that the model Elliot had built was based on these drawings. It was then that they learned Elliot built models of planes for children. He had never built a full-sized, real plane before. Everyone was furious, especially Ian, who held a gun to Elliot's head. He accused Elliot of making fools of them for weeks, saying the plane would never fly because he had never built one before. But Elliot was confident. He said that even though they were small, his model planes were remote-controlled and required more precision in their balance. Frank stopped Ian. Suddenly, a storm began, and as the winds picked up, the plane they had worked so hard on began to lift slightly on its own. Everyone realized that the plane would indeed fly. The hope that had died within them was reignited. But it was a desert storm, and the plane was completely buried in sand. After the storm ended, everyone was disheartened again, unsure if the plane could actually fly. But Frank insisted, saying, "We all worked hard on this. We will fly it out of here." They dug the plane out of the sand and pulled it to a place with no sand. They tried to start the plane. It started but quickly shut down. They tried several times, and finally, it started and stayed on. The sound of the engine drew the smugglers, who came on horseback with their guns, ready to kill them. Everyone climbed onto the plane and held onto the wings, as the design of the rebuilt plane had no room for passengers inside. The plane began to accelerate down the runway, with the smugglers firing shots at them. No one was hit. They ran out of runway, and the smugglers thought they were all dead, but at the last moment, the Pheonix flew out of the ditch and began to soar into the sky. Everyone was overjoyed. Their weeks of hard work had paid off. They had escaped from the mouth of death in a dangerous desert from which it was impossible to escape.